Well, hello there, folks, and thank you so much for tuning into Fun Ahead TV today. I'm gonna go ahead and state a bit of an understatement. This is gonna be a big episode. Today is the big day. We are doing something to this car that I have been wanting to do for such a long time. Actually, two things to this car, both of which are super secret modifications that I hinted at in the last episode. Well, actually really only hinted at one of them, but I've got two surprises for you. It was a big deal. Definitely not gonna wanna miss it. Stay tuned.
Go back. Drop in and just smack the bah!
So this right here is my 2001 Porsche 911 Carrera 4, a vehicle that we have worked on extensively on this channel, with the entire goal of making it the most bulletproof, reliable Porsche on the planet. And in my opinion, it is. This is a car that I am extremely proud of. We've done so much work to this thing over time. Last year, we did an entire engine rebuild on this thing. Literally, bottom up, the entire engine. Did it need it? No, not at all. But I wanted to just put everything that we could possibly put in this engine to just make it super duper beefy. It now has the 3.8 liter Ellen Engineering Nikasil Nickies inside of it, brand new pistons, beefed up bearings, beefed up hardware, you name it, this thing is completely bulletproof. Not to mention the fact that we have an entirely beefed up cooling system on this, including the center radiator and a beefed up oiling system. About 2 extra quarts of capacity in it, plus we have the X51 baffle. So just on the oiling system note, if you've been following along the last couple episodes, we just put a fresh set of coilovers on this thing, which will improve our cornering capabilities on track dramatically. Now that's great, but depending on how we set the suspension up with all this new adjustability, and depending on what tires we end up putting on this thing, that means we could potentially be testing the limits of even the deep sump with the improved baffle on track. Now, in the name of making this thing the most beefy 911 on the planet, I'm gonna do one last bit of throwing the kitchen sink at this thing to make this thing absolutely, unquestionably robust on track. We're gonna do that by doing some race car stuff and taking the oiling system to the max. Now you might be going, dude, what does that mean? How are you gonna do that? Well, let me show you. With this white box.
Whoa.
No, not the white box. It's what's in the white box. With this.
Oh.
This, my friends, is how we beef up the oiling system even further. You might be going, David, that's pretty. What is it?
Yeah.
This is called an Accusump, and it makes sure that no matter what, under whatever sustained cornering G's we can put this engine through, no matter what level of oil sloshing and oil deprivation to the pickup that we can possibly throw at this bad boy, this right here will make sure that there will always be oil pressure as long as there's oil in this thing. So you're saying to yourself, that's chilling out, Max, and relaxing, all cool and all about this here Accusump thing, but how exactly, how does it work? Elaborate.
Be a good sport and indulge us and just tell us a little more.
Well, all right, please focus your attention on this here PowerPoint presentation to my very, very janky representation of what your oil sump looks like. You got your sump, you got your oil level, you've got your pickup. That pickup is then supplying oil to your oil pump, and it's shooting off to your engine once it gets pressurized by your oil pump. There's a piston inside of your Accusump. On one side is the oil side, the other is compressed air. This compressed air supplies pressure to this oil on this side. Now everything's all good and happy when you're driving straight down a road and your oil level is at a good place. Now, let's say you go into a very sustained, very high speed corner and your oil does not remain in this state. In that situation, your oil then sloshes way off to the side, starving your pickup of oil, potentially. Now, that's a very bad situation because of course, your engine, it needs oil. Now, when and if you do lose oil pressure, that pressurized air will shoot that oil out of the Accusump straight at your oil pump to supply oil during the time that your oil pickup is starved of oil. Then of course, once that corner ends, all is right as rain again, Accusump fills back up, oil levels at a good level, and meanwhile, your engine never lost oil pressure.
race car stuff, baby. You know what I mean? So you might be saying to yourself, all right, that's great. The Accusump apparently works wonders and it's total race car stuff. But how do you install it? Well, obviously you just take your airbox off and you set it right here. And then Nope, there's more to it than that. In fact, there's a lot more to it than that. In order to install the Accusump, we need to answer a lot of questions. One, and most importantly, how do we then tap into the oiling system of the engine? Maybe we just like drill some holes in the side of the engine block and run a hose to it? No, that's not it either. We'll talk about that more, but that's question one. Question two, where do we install the Accusump? Well, part of that is why I actually have the bumper off and the exhaust off to consider all possibilities. Again, we'll talk about that more later in the video. The other question we need to ask is, okay, depending on where we mount this, we then have to put an oil hose going from this to the engine somewhere. So we need to consider that layout depending on where we end up mounting this. And also, we need to run some electronics to this thing because there's an electronic valve that mounts to this side of the Accusump that controls the oil flow in and out of it, which then needs to be controlled by a switch in the driver's seat. So we need to somehow run electrical from wherever this is mounted up into the front of the car. The reason we have to answer all these questions is because race car stuff, you can't just say, hey, I want to put this Accusump on my engine, and then they go, all right, here are the instructions for how to do it. You can either get extremely race car and just start ripping out bits of your car to mount this, or you can do it how I would like to do it, and that is do a very, very clean install. I still want it to look clean, I still want it to look good, and even though it's acting like race car, I don't want it to look like stripped out race car. So therefore that becomes an additional challenge for our specific considerations. Okay, back in the workshop here, we're gonna go ahead and kick things off by answering the question of how do we plumb in the Accusump into the engine? Where do we tap in to the oiling system? This is a new oil pump. Let me show you. All right, so it's not the full oil pump, of course, but it's part of the oil pump. If you're familiar with how these M96, M97 oil pumps look, this should look pretty familiar to you. But there's a major difference, and that is this guy right here. This is an AN10 fitting, which allows us to put a hose on it. And when you look at the other side of this, again, those of you familiar with this will know this is exactly where your oil pressure relief valve sits. That piston sits right up in here. There's a spring, and this then controls how much oil gets returned back to the sump from the oil pump in the event that it's, supplying too much oil pressure. This is a perfect place to tap into your oiling system because your Accusump, which is plumbed in to the oil pressure relief valve directly right here, is here ready to supply oil the moment the oil pump is starved of oil. That's right. Oil can then be fed back right into here to your oil pump to be pumped back up into your engine. Pretty slick, right? This particular piece is made by Hartec, the UK-based Porsche engine builder. Their US headquarters is called Slacker Racing Development in Oklahoma City. So I bought this from them because it is quite honestly the simplest way to tap into a Porsche M96 oiling system. Prior to this little baby right here, people would have to do some pretty crazy stuff with regards to remote mounted oil filters, a lot of additional plumbing, just to be able to tap into the oiling system. And this allows you to get directly into it and supply oil directly to the oil pump. So that answers question one. Let's go ahead and start knocking out the rest of our question list. So given that we know how we're plumbing into our oiling system with our Accusump, let's talk about where we're gonna put it. When you look down into the engine, you can see the old oil pump cover That's exactly the same part that we were just talking about back in the workshop, but of course it doesn't have our attachment. That attachment will come out roughly right about here. So right in front of our crank pulley here, and it will aim kind of up in this direction, meaning that we are going to have an oil hose coming up and out of here. Question is, from here, where does it then go? So knowing that, where do we want to mount the Accusump? Let's talk about some of my personal top prospects. All right, so here we are underneath the car, looking up towards the engine. And again, here is our oil pump cover. Our hose for the oil line will be going somewhere up in that direction. And the question is, where does it go from there? Now, initially, one of my first thoughts was this corner right here. Now, obviously, I have the muffler bypass system, which of course is not on the car right now. Therefore, it completely frees up this entire area, which is normally taken up by one of the two mufflers. All right, now option 2 is actually directly under the car. This is the tunnel that goes up towards the front of the car. This tunnel is a completely wide open piece of real estate that we could utilize if we wanted to. And that's actually what a lot of guys will do with Accusumps. They will mount their Accusump right up here in this tunnel. Nice big area directly out of the way. Not a bad option. And lastly, let's take a look at option 3. This rear shelf area. Now, same with what I did on the rear of the car by taking off the bumper and the exhaust and everything. I just wanted to take all of the rear shelf padding and everything, carpeting apart, just so that I can make as good of a decision as possible and fully evaluate the situation. So looking at this rear shelf, we can see that we have plenty of real estate to be able to put an Accusump. And it's nice and close to the engine, but of course with every one of these options comes pros and cons. So on that note, let's go ahead and evaluate all of those.
All right, back in PowerPoint land here, I devised a quick 1 to 3 rating system to be able to, as objectively as possible, evaluate all 3 of these mounting locations. I came up with some primary categories: oil line plumbability, electrical plumbability, mountability, protection from heat and elements, and visibility to driver, i.e. being able to see the pressure gauge on the Accusump, to be able to see its fill level. Starting out with the below the rear fender, I gave it a 3 for oil line plumbability because it's so close to that oil pump cover. Electrical plumbability, fairly simple, but difficult because we'd have to then route the electrical wiring inside of the car. That presents a bit of a challenge, but not too terrible. Mountability, not a very ideal mounting surface. I very much don't love it. Plus the fact that it is right in the line of fire from heat from the exhaust and the elements, i.e. rocks and things getting kicked up off of the rear tire. And of course, visibility to the driver is, well, basically it's a 0 because it's impossible to see. Finally, we have an average of 1.6. Next up, looking at the center underbody tunnel. I gave this a 1 for oil line plumbability because the oil line required to be able to plumb this would be so long. Electrical plumbability, about the same as the below rear fender location. Mountability, very much not ideal mounting surface. Yet again, the tunnel would be kind of awkward to mount the Accusump to. Protection from heat and elements, it's a little better being tucked up in that tunnel. And lastly, for visibility to the driver, again, it's impossible to see, so it's a 1. Therefore, giving this an average score of 1.4. Lastly, interior rear shelf. Oil line plumbability, it's about a 2. Plumbing the oil line into the interior definitely adds a level of difficulty. Electrical plumbability, I gave this a 3 because, well, we need to plumb into the interior. We're already going to be in the interior anyway. Mountability, that rear shelf is perfect for mounting. Definite 3. Protection from heat and elements, again, it's inside the car, out of the elements, 3. Visibility to the driver, it's not going to be ideal because I'm going to have to look in my rearview mirror, but it is going to be visible from the driver's seat, so I gave it a 2. Finally, 2.6 is the rating of this mounting location, making it the clear winner.
The ripping and the tearing.
So in that case, it's decided. Taking the most objective and logical approach to the placement of our Accusump, I think we can safely say putting it on that rear shelf is not a bad option. In fact, I think it'll be the best option. Yes, we could always risk having oil leaks inside of the car, which is not ideal. However, that's on me. If I make sure that this thing is sealed up properly and all the threads are good and we put plenty of thread tape on it and test it before installing, I don't think we'll actually run into any issues. But of course, it's definitely gonna be something that I'm monitoring, especially in the testing phase once we actually get this thing back on the road. I have spent the last several hours roughing in all of the wiring throughout the car with the consideration of that rear shelf placement. That took me quite a bit of time, but we basically have everything in place with regards to wiring. I wanted to do that first because I wanted to prove the feasibility of that placement with regards to the wiring. If there was no way for me to get all the wiring up to where it needed to be, then obviously the placement of the Accusump on that rear shelf is going to make absolutely no sense. But fortunately, I was able to do that, which is very nice. And now we can start going ahead and installing the Accusump. Now, in addition to the electrical routing, we of course need to consider how in the world are we going to get oil to and from our Accusump if we're putting it on this rear shelf. Obviously, the interior does present its fair bit of challenges because, well, it's on the inside of the car. Let's go ahead and evaluate this really quickly, shall we? Because fortunately for us, it's almost like Porsche made this rear shelf for Accusumps. Now, when you look at the interior of the car, this rear shelf, you can see that Porsche has placed a couple of body holes on that shelf. Back there, you can see a grommet. I went ahead and popped that off on the other side, and I was able to feed our oil line up and through it. Now, I did have to utilize a Christmas tree bit to kind of oversize that hole just slightly, but I only had to bump it out by about 1/16 of an inch, and I was able to really nicely fit that AN line through there, which, by the way, AN line, baby. We're freaking doing race car stuff. We've got AN line on this thing. Pfft, dude, she is the goat. But before I get carried away with the race car goat stuff, let me go ahead and show you what that line looks like on this side of things. Looking up in that area, well, of course, everything is black, so it's gonna be hard to see, but you can see that AN line running up and into our interior right next to our power steering lines there. And that very nicely runs down. And of course, we have way too much length right now. We're gonna have to trim this down, but that will very nicely reach down to our oil pump cover, and then we'll be able to tap in and get oil pressure straight to our Accusump. And the really nice thing about this is it's still not that long of a line. Fortunately, with this particular rear shelf setup, we're only gonna have probably just under 3 feet of oil line going to that thing. So that's very, very nice. Much, much better than what it would have been had we put it up in that front tunnel. We would have had like 6 or 7 feet of oil line. That would have not been ideal. Okay, now obviously the engine room of a Porsche 911 is very, very compact. Every square inch of that thing is utilized and optimized to fit any kind of powertrain component inside of it, which means that our engine goes right up to that rear shelf, with the exception of 3/4 of an inch of gap, maybe slightly more. We are definitely at risk of drilling down into our intake manifold if we're not careful. As a result, I have custom modified some drill bits. If you can see that, yeah, this is what will guarantee that we don't push through and end up damaging anything that we don't want to damage. So then you're probably wondering, given our space constraint here, how in the world am I going to actually fasten our Accusump mounts to our rear shelf? So the answer to the question of how in the world we're going to get our Accusump secured down to that rear shelf lies right here with this unit. This is a riv nut gun. The gist of this is, well, it's like a rivet gun, but the rivets are a little different. This is a riv nut. Looks just like a normal rivet, basically, except the inside of it is threaded. All you need is a hole in metal somewhere, and you can make yourself a threaded hole by utilizing one of these. And I actually already tried it yesterday in this like scrap sheet metal I had sitting around, and this thing is freaking beefcake. I put some serious torque into this thing and it held. Like, it did not spin in here whatsoever. These things are surprisingly robust. That's what we drilled those holes for. So now we can just put these in, and we're gonna have really nice threaded holes that don't go too far down to hold our Accusump in place. Next item on the agenda is we need to get this end of the AN line all sorted out. Like I said, we are going to be utilizing that oil pump cover from Slacker/Hardtech to be able to tap in to our oil system with this. We need to install that first, and then we can go ahead and start figuring out the exact length of this. We are going to have to completely disconnect the engine mount plate, that bracket, remove that because it's currently sandwiched right up against our oil pump. Then we can take our oil pump apart. So first we need to figure out how to support the engine. Well, we're actually gonna do that using my little Harbor Freight lift cart here, and then we can disconnect the engine mounts. Bread.
Bread. Bread. Bread. Bread. Bread. Bread.
All right, so I've gone ahead and mocked up our setup here. As you can see, we've got that Hardtech oil pump cover already kind of just softly installed. But I put it all there just so we can kind of check our length. It does seem like this length will give us plenty of slack here. I can put an actual better zip tie around this coolant pipe here to kind of, you know, restrain this, keep this in check. And we have plenty of clearance to our crank pulley here. It doesn't really look like it on camera, but it's not going to be anywhere close to that when this is all spinning.
Bread. Bread. Bread.
Y'all, I'm getting kind of excited. I just got her bundled up with regards to the engine room setup. Well, come on in here, take a look at it. All right, so taking a look right down in here, you can see we've got our engine mount plate back in place, and here is our AN line running up into the interior of the car. This thing almost looks like it's supposed to be there. Clean, baby. We're still in the mock-up phase, people. We're still in the mock-up phase. But it feels good because, you know, we kind of had to do all this very kind of methodically. Get the inside stuff done first, make sure that we have the correct amount of hose length inside the car to the actual Accusump itself, then work down to the oil pump cover, get that installed, make sure we've got our hose length right. We now do, which means we can go back inside the car and finish the installation. We need to finish wiring, we need to tighten everything down, and we need to perform a function check to make sure that this whole thing wants to actually work. All right, friends, back inside the car here. I've got a little bit of an update to show you. Check it out. So I have the mounts fully tied down both around the Accusump itself and to our rear shelf. We've got the AN line tightened down to our valve, and everything is wired in place. These wires do look more taut than they actually are. Plus, there's room for these to move if they need to. So everything is in. That means we can perform our function check, i.e. key this puppy on, flip our switch for the Accusump, and see if we hear that valve click open and closed. All right, keying on. Listen for a click. Oh yeah.
Bread. Bread. Bread.
Look at her. She's getting more ready to rip down the road by the second. As you can see, I've been doing quite a few things off camera, but they're all very boring things. Things like undercovers, torquing the CV shafts of the transmission, putting the bumper back on, a few other little odds and ends. Oh, and I put the exhaust back on, as you can see. But you're wondering, that's the same exhaust that you took off at the beginning of the project when we started taking things apart, right?
Yeah.
Right, that's the same one?
Yeah.
That's the same exhaust that we had up in the car before, right? Well, I have a surprise for you guys.
Surprise, mother.
Check it out, boys and girls. That is not the same exhaust that came off the car. That right there is a FabSpeed X-pipe with the 200 cell cats. What that means is this is a nice freaking exhaust. Now you astute observers possibly might recognize this pipe. That was the exact pipe that we took off of Joey's super tasty Tiptronic.
Oh, yum.
So he decided, well, I'm not doing anything with my old X-pipe. David, do you want it? So therefore, I thought about it for a little bit and finally in the end was like, yeah, I absolutely do. So this is called an X-pipe because of the way it is.
Because of the way it is.
As you can see, it's shaped like an X. And that shape has one primary advantage, and that is that because these two U-shaped pipes are cut and welded in the middle, therefore connected on either side, the sound can pass back and forth between the two. The stock exhaust does not have any connection between the two for each bank. Each bank literally just runs independently out of the back of the car. The downside is that if you're standing off to the side of the car and you're not really hearing sound evenly from both pipes, you really only get 3 cylinders of sound go into your eardrums and the other 3 sound kind of faint, which gives it kind of a weird sound. I am looking forward to this exhaust from so many angles. Plus the fact that this thing is a FabSpeed exhaust pipe with those 200 cell cats, which means they flow much more air than the stock cats do. Therefore, we're gonna get a performance benefit as well, which is especially important when you consider that this is the larger displacement 3.8 liter engine. She's moving more air, therefore the exhaust needs to be able to flow more. So this thing's gonna be sweet from all of the angles. So we're getting very close to being able to turn the key on this thing. I just need to go ahead and do a few more things. Got a couple more undercovers to throw on her. We gotta put coolant in it, we gotta put oil in it, and then I think we'll be ready to turn the key and test fire everything. Well friends, the time has come. I just finished up putting fluids in her. We vacuum bled it and then filled it with some fresh Porsche coolant and distilled water, 50-50. And I just put in, so far, just as a starting point, 9 quarts of this AMSOIL 10W60 European formula oil, which by the way, if you want AMSOIL products at 25% off, you can click my link in the description below to become one of my preferred customers. It's a pretty awesome customer program that AMSOIL has, so definitely worth checking out if you're into AMSOIL products at all. But anyway, that aside, we should be good to go for our very first start. What I'm nervous about though is the following. 1, will we build oil pressure the same as we always do, because we do have that little bit of an air pocket at the very end of our Accusump and within our oil line going to the Accusump that is going to act like a bit of an air spring. And 2, are we going to leak from all of our new fittings with regards to the Accusump? I'm not 100% sure, but for now, we really only have one thing to do to find that out. We need to start it up. This is one of those situations where we did a lot of custom stuff, so I'm just trying to make sure that I crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's before actually turning the key. But let's go ahead and do a quick oil level check. Make sure the digital oil level reading agrees with the manual one, and it does. Let's go ahead and see what happens. Okay, haven't quite built oil pressure yet. Gonna go ahead and do it one more time. There's oil pressure. That took a second. I think we definitely have a bit of an air spring for sure, which I don't love, but it kind of just is what it is. All right, let's get out and check it out. First of all, holy freaking balls. Listen to this exhaust just at idle. Oh my God. Woo, that sounds amazing. All right, next item on the agenda is we need to go ahead and check in the back here. Okay, I still don't see any oil leaks. That's good. Additionally, just checking for oil leaks down by our new oil pump cover, and I don't see any. So far, so good. Okay, so I just shut the car down because I was gonna do an oil level check. And I happened to glance back at the Accusump just to double check for leaks one more time. And what's weird was the pressure on it was really high. I hadn't flipped the switch on. So for whatever reason, it built pressure in the Accusump when it shouldn't have. What? Maybe I'm just not understanding how the valve works itself, but I thought if it was off, it would be closed. Is it not? I don't know. So, good news. I figured some stuff out. I now know exactly what the heck was going wrong during that first start. Turns out it was nothing. Turns out that's exactly the way the electronic valve on these Accusumps are designed. They're one-way valves. They accept pressure if they see pressure into the Accusump. Basically, they can charge the Accusump even when the Accusump isn't powered on. Good news is we do in fact have it wired up correctly. That's just a characteristic of the electronic valves. Bad news is we will end up having to put some kind of a hard shut-off valve in there. That way we can just shut oil flow off to the Accusump altogether manually in the event that, for whatever reason, we don't want oil going to it. So that's an eventual thing that we're gonna have to figure out. We've got a lot of big things coming in next week's episode. We've got to test and evaluate this brand new suspension. We've got to confirm that our Accusump functions on the road properly, and we get to drive this thing with this brand new, super spicy exhaust, and I cannot wait to hear what this thing sounds like out on the open road. It's gonna be awesome. That, therefore, like I said, is going to be it for this week, but we accomplished so much today. We did a full custom install of this Accusump, wired it, plumbed it, mounted it, all of which had to be custom to this car, thought out for our particular application and what we want. And we now have a fully functioning 2-quart Accusump that's gonna help this thing be an absolute track weekend warrior to make this engine that much more bulletproof reliable while she's cornering at the limit. That's freaking race car stuff. Thank you again so much for being here. I really appreciate each and every one of you. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that thumbs up button. And please subscribe so you can see even more super awesome car content coming down the pipeline to you via Funhead TV every single week. And whack that bell notification while you're at it. Thank you again so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. Yes, you. I'm looking right at you. And I'll see you all in next week's episode. Later. Let's take 2 seconds and hit the old pause button. Just kind of clear the air a little bit, if you will. I know what some of you are probably thinking. You're going, okay, does that mean that in order to be completely safe putting one of these on the track that I also need an Accusump? The answer to that question is a resounding no. Is the Accusump a little bit overkill for this car? Yeah, absolutely. If you're someone who has pretty much a street setup in your 911, Cayman, Boxster, what have you, you definitely don't need one of these. I very much highly recommend going and getting a deep sump and also the X51 baffle, an upgraded baffle, to kind of help hold the oil near the pickup that much longer. That being said, this is Project Beef, people. We're making the beefiest 996 M96 powered Porsche on the planet. And in doing so, you know we're beefing up that oiling system to the nines. So therefore, I can take our brand new suspension setup and just do the nastiest, most aggressive track focused suspension setup possible. I can take these wheels and put the most sticky, slick track tires on them if I want to. And I know in my mind that my engine is completely safe and can handle the insane cornering G's that would result from such a setup. Because the Accusump is going to be there to make sure that that puppy stays oiled. That's the point, people. This is Project Beef. Is it overkill? Yes, absolutely. But that's the point.
Pull back. Drop in and just smack the lip. Bah!
Bread.